When a grieving father suspected something wasn't right about his daughter's death, he made a desperate decision to place a hidden camera in her coffin. What he discovered will shock you and break your heart. Before we dive into this thrilling story, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives. Let's get started. Malcolm Carter's mornings were always the same. He'd wake up before the sun, fire up the stove, and hum softly as he cooked breakfast for his 9-year-old daughter, Ava. Their modest home in Lawrenceville, Georgia, felt alive whenever Ava was around. Her laughter, her drawings, her endless questions about the world. She was his reason to keep going after her mother's death 5 years ago. "Make sure you get my muscles right," Malcolm teased as Ava sketched a picture of them under a big oak tree. She giggled, holding up the half-finished drawing. "You're the strongest dad in the world." Malcolm kissed the top of her head. "Don't you forget it." That morning felt like any other, but it would be the last time Malcolm would hear her laugh. The house was quiet in the afternoon, too quiet. Malcolm Carter sat at the dining table, invoices from the shop spread out before him, but his mind wasn't on work. Earlier that morning, Ava had begged to go to Rhodes Jordan Park with her best friend, Mia. "Please, Daddy, Mia's mom is taking us," she'd said, her face lit with excitement. Malcolm hesitated, but Mia's mother, Candace, assured him she'd watch the girls closely. "They'll be fine," she said. Against his better judgment, he relented. "Okay," he said, ruffling Ava's curls. "Be careful, all right?" "I promise," she called as she ran out the door. Now Malcolm's eyes kept drifting to the clock. It had only been an hour, but something gnawed at him, a quiet unease he couldn't shake. He was about to grab his phone to check in when it rang first. "Hello?" he answered, frowning at the unfamiliar number. "Mr. Carter," a calm, steady voice replied. "This is Officer Reed. You need to come to Northside Hospital, Gwinnett, immediately. It's about your daughter." The air seemed to leave the room. Malcolm clutched the phone tighter. "What happened? Is she okay?" His voice cracked. "Sir, it's best if you come now," the officer said gently. The phone slipped from Malcolm's hand as panic flooded his chest. Grabbing his keys, he bolted out the door, every second stretching unbearably long as he drove. When Malcolm arrived, the cold, antiseptic smell of the hospital hit him like a physical blow. A nurse met him and guided him to a doctor waiting in the hallway. One look at her face, and Malcolm's stomach sank. "We did everything we could," the doctor began softly. "Ava fell from the jungle gym. She hit her head, and she didn't make it. I'm so sorry." Her words shattered him. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, that's not possible. She was fine. She's just a little girl." "I'm so sorry," the doctor repeated, her voice distant as the weight of reality pressed down on him. Malcolm stumbled back, gripping the wall. Images of Ava's bright smile, her laugh, her promise to be careful flashed in his mind. And with them came the crushing thought, "I should have been there. I should have gone with her." His legs gave way, and he sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The hospital noise faded into silence. Ava, his baby girl, was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. The funeral came too soon. Malcolm barely remembered how it was arranged. Friends and neighbors had stepped in, their murmured condolences blurring into meaningless noise. All he knew was that Ava's small white coffin, trimmed in gold, sat at the front of the church, impossibly small, beneath the towering stained glass windows. Malcolm stood over the coffin, his hands trembling as he brushed a curl from Ava's forehead. She looked peaceful, almost as if she were only asleep. But something gnawed at him, a quiet, insistent unease he couldn't explain. His gaze caught on the bruises lining her arms and legs, marks that hadn't been mentioned in the autopsy report. Then he noticed her tiny hands. Dirt clung beneath her fingernails, stark against her pale skin. His heart clenched. Why would there be dirt? He wondered, his breath hitching. "You're imagining things," his sister, Tasha, said when he confided in her after the service. She'd flown in from Charlotte to support him. "You've been through too much. Let yourself grieve, Malcolm." But he couldn't let it go. The funeral workers' dismissive tones, the way their eyes darted when he asked questions, and the whispered comment he overheard. People like them never pushed back, only fueled his growing doubts. His grief twisted into something darker, suspicion. The night before Ava's burial, Malcolm sat alone in the funeral home's quiet viewing room. The dim light cast long shadows across the flowers surrounding her small white coffin. He hadn't wanted to leave her, not yet. But tonight wasn't just about saying goodbye. The bruises on her arms, the dirt under her nails, and the rushed explanations haunted him. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it. From his pocket, he pulled a tiny camera he'd bought earlier that day. His hands shook as he gently positioned it inside the coffin's lid, hidden, but with a clear view of the interior. His chest tightened with guilt, but the thought of not knowing the truth hurt more. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I have to know." When Tasha arrived to check on him, he confessed. "I put a camera in her coffin." Her face froze in shock. "Malcolm, you're grieving. This isn't right. I can't just let it go," he said, his voice hard. "What if they didn't care enough because of who we are? What if something happened and no one looked closer?" Tasha frowned, her tone softening. "And what if you're wrong? Then at least I'll know I didn't stop fighting for her," he said quietly. The next evening, after the burial, Malcolm sat alone at his computer. The live feed from the camera showed only darkness. Hours passed, and the silence pressed heavy on his chest. Just as exhaustion began to creep in, something flickered on the screen. He leaned closer, his heart pounding. A faint scraping noise filled the speakers, quiet, deliberate. Then, shadows moved across the frame, followed by low, muffled voices. Malcolm replayed the footage over and over, his hands trembling as he dragged the timeline back. Each time, he caught the faint scraping sound, the flicker of shadows, and those haunting whispers. "Quick, they won't even notice. Just get it done. They'll never check." His chest tightened with each replay. This wasn't a glitch or his grief playing tricks on him. Someone had been in Ava's coffin. By morning, Malcolm's exhaustion was masked by a fiery determination. He drove to the Lawrenceville Police Department, clutching the flash drive with the footage. Inside, he approached the front desk, his voice tight with urgency. "I need to report something about my daughter's death." The officer frowned, but agreed to pass the footage along. 30 minutes later, a detective emerged, his face unreadable as he handed the flash drive back. "This doesn't prove anything," he said flatly. "The audio is unclear, and the shadows could be interference." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "You didn't even listen to the whole thing." The detective raised a placating hand. "I understand you're grieving, Mr. Carter, but I suggest you focus on moving forward. Chasing conspiracy theories won't help." Malcolm left the station in a daze, anger simmering just beneath the surface. He replayed the words in his mind, the dismissal like a slap in the face. "They don't care. They think I'm just another grieving black father who won't push back." That evening, Tasha stopped by to check on him. She found him pacing the living room, his fists clenched. "The police won't help," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "If I want answers, I'll have to find them myself." "What are you going to do?" Tasha asked, worry etched across her face. "I don't know yet," he admitted, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and helplessness. "But I won't let them bury the truth." Malcolm sat in the dark, staring at his computer screen. The police wouldn't help, but maybe someone else would. His search led him to Sophia Martinez, an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She'd exposed injustices before, and her articles had sparked real change. With a shaky breath, he sent her the footage. The next day, Sophia called. "Mr. Carter, I watched the video. Something's definitely wrong, but we'll need more proof. Patterns, witnesses, anything that connects the dots." Over the next few days, Sophia's digging uncovered a disturbing history. Carter and Son's funeral home had multiple complaints: mishandling bodies, reused caskets, falsified records. Malcolm wasn't surprised, but it hit him hard. Meanwhile, he and Tasha tracked down Eric Porter, a former employee. They met at a diner, Eric's hands shaking as he spoke. "You think you're the first?" "They've been cutting corners for years, swapping bodies, rushing embalming. If they messed with your daughter, it's because they were hiding something." Malcolm's stomach twisted. "Will you go on record?" Eric's eyes darted nervously. "No way. They'll come after me, and you too. Be careful," he warned before hurrying out. Sophia emailed Malcolm later that night. Her latest discovery revealed ties between the funeral home and local hospitals, raising suspicions of systemic profit-sharing. Malcolm barely had time to process this before he stepped outside and froze. "Stop digging" was spray-painted across his garage door. The chill in his chest turned to fire. Tasha begged him to let it go. "Malcolm, it's too dangerous." But he shook his head. "This isn't just about me. It's about Ava and every other family they've done this to. I'm not backing down." Sitting across from Sophia at a quiet cafe, Malcolm laid out his notes. "The police won't help," Sophia said firmly. "We'll go public, but it won't be easy. We need more proof." Malcolm nodded. "Whatever it takes." Sophia's digging revealed damning truths: rushed embalming, falsified records, and ties between the funeral home and local hospitals that hinted at financial motives. Malcolm reached out to other families and heard similar stories: rushed services, mishandled bodies, and unanswered questions. Eric Porter, the hesitant former funeral home employee, finally agreed to speak. "They told us no one would notice," he said, "especially not families like his." When Sophia published her findings, the outrage was immediate. Protests erupted outside Carter & Sons funeral home, with signs reading "Justice for Ava" and "No more neglect." Local news stations picked up the story, and the pressure forced the police to reopen the case. But danger followed. One night, Malcolm woke to find a brick through his window and a note: "Stop, or you'll regret it." Tasha begged him to stop. "They're threatening you, Malcolm." "I don't care," he said. "Ava deserves justice." Under public scrutiny, Carter & Sons faced trial. Malcolm's attorney, Olivia Bennett, presented the hidden camera footage. The courtroom fell silent as the whispers played. "Quick, they won't even notice. Just get it done. They'll never check." The defense tried to discredit the evidence, but Eric's testimony was damning. They reused caskets, rushed embalming, and cut corners. Families like Malcolm's? They didn't care. Malcolm gripped the table as Eric's words hung in the air. The fight for Ava was no longer just his. It was for every family who'd been wronged. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreperson stood. Malcolm held his breath, Tasha's hand gripping his tightly. On the charges of gross negligence and fraudulent practices, we find the defendants guilty. Relief flooded Malcolm, though it was bittersweet. The funeral home faced fines, and several employees were charged, but nothing could bring Ava back. Justice had been served, but the ache in his heart remained. After the trial, Malcolm visited Ava's grave, the cemetery quiet under the soft afternoon sun. Kneeling by her headstone, he traced her name with trembling fingers. "They saw you, baby," he whispered. "They heard you." Tasha stood nearby, her eyes glistening. "She'd be proud of you, Malcolm," she said softly. Malcolm poured his grief into action, founding the Ava Carter Foundation to fight negligence in funeral services. Sophia's articles kept the story alive, exposing deeper systemic issues and sparking calls for reform. One day, while cleaning Ava's room, Malcolm found her unfinished drawing of them under a tree. He framed it and hung it in the living room. Beneath it were the words, "Always together, Dad." As he stood outside, a warm breeze brushing against his face, Malcolm felt hope for the first time in months. Ava's story had ignited a movement, and he vowed to keep fighting, for her and for every family who needed a voice. Ava's memory lived on, not just in his heart, but in the movement she had inspired. Her story was no longer just his, it belonged to everyone who had ever fought for justice and refused to back down. What are your thoughts? How did Malcolm's journey resonate with you? Share your feelings in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and make a difference. Thank you for being part of this journey.